In Mark 3:14, we read, He appointed 12, designated them apostles, that they might be with him, and then he might send them out to preach. Jesus needed friends, and that passage says that he appointed 12 and he trained them to preach in his absence, but it also says that he appointed them so that they might be with him. Jesus needed people around him for companionship and interaction. You remember when Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John up to the mountain of transfiguration, and he wanted those three to be with him in his moment of exhilaration. Remember Jesus taking those same three with him when he went into the Garden of Gethsemane. He asked them to watch and pray because he said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Jesus wanted those three to be with him in his time of sorrow. Somebody said a joy shared is a double joy, but a sorrow shared is half a sorrow. Now, if Jesus needed friends, how much more do we? That's why the writers of the New Testament use the term one another so often. They tell us to pray for one another, share each other's burdens, encourage one another, exhort one another, edify one another, be devoted to one another, live in harmony with one another, accept one another, edify one another, instruct one another, greet one another, serve one another, bear one another's burdens, submit to one another, forgive one another, offer hospitality to one another, and spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Obviously, the Christian life is not to be lived in isolation. God wants us to live in fellowship and companionship with one another. Now, it seems to me that there are three levels of friendship. First is there are casual friends, people we enjoy being with on occasion. Jesus had a lot of casual friends. In fact, it appears that he had thousands of those. Then the second level is close friends, people who we are with frequently and we feel comfortable and relaxed in their presence. John records these words of Jesus to the 12 disciples. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Then there's the third level, that's intimate friends. These are people with whom there is a complete blending of spirits. People who know almost everything about us. Jesus had those intimate friends, Peter, James, and John. You don't have to work in an intimate friendship. It's just kind of happens naturally over time. And if you have 2 or 3 intimate friends over the course of a lifetime, you are a blessed individual. Your close friends may be members of your family, maybe people you grew up with, maybe people you met at church. But since relationships are such an important part of the Christian life, let's look at what Proverbs has to say about choosing, abusing, and improving friendships. First, we're instructed in Proverbs 12 to choose our friends wisely. That's a big surprise, isn't it? You hear that all the time. But it says, a righteous man is cautious in friendship, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. USA Today has one of those many polls that you can see on about why kids use drugs. And 49% of 12-year-olds said that they use drugs to be cool. In other words, to impress their friends. 25% of 17-year-olds said they used drugs because their friends were doing it. How many times have you heard parents say, He really was a good boy. He just got with the wrong crowd in high school. Or she was really an awesome young lady in high school, but then she got in with the wrong sorority and things just went downhill from there. The way of the wicked leads them astray. I like the way the Living Bible paraphrases Proverbs 27:19. A mirror reflects a man's face, but what he is really like is shown by the kind of friends he chooses. Let's look at 3 traits of selecting friends that come right out of Proverbs and from some of the writers of the New Testament. The first trait suggested in considering friends is wisdom. Proverbs 13:20 says, "He who talks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm." So, when we're selecting friends or close friends, it ought to be people of wisdom. Now, wisdom comes from God. Wisdom is the ability to see life from God's vantage point. Knowledge is horizontal. It has to do with the accumulation of facts. Wisdom is vertical. It has to do with the right application of those facts. So we're to choose friends who are wise, people who have common sense, and people who walk with God. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?" Beware of people who are foolish, lacking in judgment, violating God's rules, always risking their reputations. That goes for dating too. Date someone who desires to please God and who seeks wisdom. Harold Morris wrote Twice Pardoned, and in that book he tells it as a young man he was driving a car to impress 2 casual friends that he had that were on the wild side. Asked him to stop at a food mart, and he waited in the car, and they robbed that food mart without Harold knowing about it. The owner drew a gun, and they shot and killed the owner, ran out to the car, and said, "Drive." And he drove like crazy outside of Atlanta, took the freeway north. 2 days later, police knocked on Harold Morris's door and arrested him for murder. The other 2 had accused him of being the one who killed the clerk. And Harold Morris was given a life sentence at Georgia State Penitentiary. But later, about 20 years later, he was pardoned, but only after he had given his life to Jesus. And that's why his book is called Twice Pardoned. But he spent 2 decades of his life, really the formative years of his life, in prison. And he traces that back to running with the wrong crowd in high school, trying to impress 2 casual friends. We read in Proverbs, "Stay away from a foolish man, for you will not find knowledge on his lips." The second quality to look for in choosing friends is self-control. Look at Proverbs 22:24. "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared." You hang around someone with a quick temper, and it probably won't be long before you're in a heated argument and you alienate people. Or you're in a fight and you wind up in jail, or you begin to imitate his behavior and you become hot-tempered. Paul writes, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." Third quality that's important in selecting friends is good morals. Proverbs 29:3 says, "A man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth." The book of Proverbs warns us about hanging around with wrong people, the prostitute, the drunkard, immoral people, the glutton. Now, we have to befriend the people of the world in order to influence them for Christ. We're to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. But we've got to be careful that we don't move from being casual friends to being close friends, or else they begin to influence us rather than vice versa. Chuck Swindoll says that if you have on white gloves and you play in the mud, the gloves always get muddy, but the mud never gets glovey. And that's true. And if you get too close to the world, they begin to influence you. Several years ago, a guy by the name of Bob Harrington was known as the chaplain of Bourbon Street. And he was an incredibly popular preacher. He had a ministry to the prostitutes and strippers in New Orleans. And He would go right into the bars and the night spots to witness to them about Christ. And when people would caution him, he would say, I know how to cope. I know where to draw the line. But he stayed too long. And after a few years, Bob Harrington had an affair, and he lost his marriage and his ministry. He later remarried, tried to preach again, but his witness was just a shadow of what it once was. A man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. And the wealth you squander may not be dollars. It can be the wealth of your reputation, or the wealth of your family, or the wealth of your walk with God. Secondly, Proverbs also warns us about abusing friends. Maybe you have wise, even-tempered, godly friends, but instead of cultivating them, you abuse them. Maybe you lose them. Maybe you don't have many close friends or any close friends. Look through these Proverbs and think of some of the ways that you possibly might be abusing your friendships. We see in Proverbs 16:28, a perverse man stirs up dissension, and a gossip separates close friends. So one way we abuse friends is that we gossip about them behind their back. Maybe you have a friend who is influential, and you can get attention by spreading a rumor about them. That may temporarily make you the center of attention in a small group, but in the long run, it costs you a friendship because you can't be trusted. A friend's not a friend if he's two-faced. A friend is not a friend if they stab you in the back. A friend is not a friend if they gossip about you when you're not there. A good friend always stands up for you when you're not there. Robert Ralph said, a friend will play the role of advocate before he assumes the role of judge. Second way that we abuse friendship is similar to the first, and that's that you can abuse a friendship by disclosing confidences. Look at Proverbs 25. If you argue your case with a neighbor, do not betray another man's confidence, or he who hears it may shame you, and you will never lose your bad reputation. We do that by getting into a discussion with someone, and then we want to pull out a confidence that's shared with us to support our position. And one of the real tests of friendship is the ability to protect confidential information. If somebody trusts you enough to share some intimate information about them, you're not a friend if you can't keep your mouth shut. Look at that again. If you argue your case with a neighbor, do not betray another man's confidence, or he who hears it may shame you, and you will never lose your bad reputation. Some people think that a secret is something that's to be shared one person at a time, but that's not true. It's something you don't share at all. Proverbs 11:13 says, a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy man keeps a secret. Another way you can abuse a friendship is by carrying a joke too far. Proverbs 26 says, like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. A good friend doesn't carry a joke too far. He doesn't carry it so far that he hurts feelings. A good friend is sensitive to the feelings and doesn't ride it to death. It might be a nickname or a physical appearance or a disability or a coordination issue, but some people can ride it into the ground. And then when you object, they say, what's wrong with you? You're so sensitive. I was just joking. The same's true of practical jokes. You can carry a practical joke too far. I remember I was working a middle school camp when I was over in Ohio, and we had a great group of kids in that age group. Our church had a large group that went to camp, and that I was working. On the final night when they dismissed everybody to go to go to the dorms, I kind of kept back the kids from our church. I told them, how proud I was of them because they were awesome kids. And we talked for a little bit, and then we went up to the dorm, and it was just one other leader from the church and me, and we're the only two that had flashlights. And on our way up there, I told them that someone had escaped from a prison in the area, but it was far enough away that there was no chance that he could be there. But just to play it safe, we should all stay close, kind of go up there together. Well, the boys' dorm at this camp was kind of in a woods and up a hill. And I said, as we were going up, I said, I think I hear something over there. So me and the other guy shined our flashlights into the woods and kind of looked around a little bit, and we felt the kids pulling a little closer to us. And then I said, oh, there's nothing there. And so then we turned out the lights. But anyway, we said there's nothing there. Well, we had this all planned out, but there was a high school boy from our church working camp that week, and his name's John, about 6'1", skinny guy, but 6'1", and he was standing in the path with a goalie mask on. He had a machete. I don't remember why he took a machete to church camp, but he had a machete. So he was standing there. So when we turned our flashlights back, he was right there. I tell you, it was better than I could have imagined how that went. I was scared, and I knew it was John. But anyway, we all screamed. We ran off. But one kid by the name of Nathan Riddle just dropped to the ground and started crying uncontrollably. And as I was going away, I heard John saying, Nathan, it's me, John. This isn't real. And I guess he just thought, my life is going to end. I might as well just give up. And he just dropped right there. And so he was crying, and I came back and said, Nathan, do you know it's okay? And I felt like a jerk. The dean told his parents the next day that they didn't abuse kids at their church, so if they wanted to start attending there, that would be okay. His parents and I were good friends, and they're an amazing couple. In fact, we talked to them in the last year or so, and they told us they really want to come out here, so I guess they've forgiven me for that, but we might have carried that one just a little too far, maybe. I've done a lot of weddings in my life, and I've heard of some of the practical jokes at weddings, but there are some people who don't know where to draw the line. They destroy the dignity of the service, and they make everybody feel uncomfortable, or they make the bride and groom miserable. It's one thing to put rocks in the hubcaps or write a message in shaving cream. But when people start painting on the car messages that are difficult to get off, or tinkering with the motor so it breaks down 2 hours later, that's carrying a practical joke too far. It's one thing to play a joke and frighten someone. It's quite another to tell them a convicted criminal is on the loose and then dress up in a horror mask and jump out at a middle school boy and scare him to nearly have a heart attack. He did wind up going to Christian college, so it worked out okay in the end. Proverbs 26 says, like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Fourth way you can abuse a friendship is by wearing out your welcome. Look at this verse. Isn't this amazing that this is in the Bible? Seldom set your foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you, and he will hate you. That's actually in the Bible, in Proverbs, and it's great. Benjamin Franklin said it this way, relatives are like fish. They begin to stink after 3 days. You can stay so long at a person's house or go so often that you wear out your welcome. No matter how good of friends you are with someone, respect their space. Give them a little time. Have you ever had people over to your house and you had a great time, but from the time they told you they were leaving to the time they actually left, it was like 45 minutes to an hour? And you're standing by the door carrying on an awkward conversation, wondering when they're really going to leave? But that's not the only way you wear out your welcome. You can also wear out your welcome by demanding total allegiance from your friends. If you ever had friends where if you went somewhere and didn't tell them, they were offended? Or especially if you spend time with someone else, they kind of get mad. Something is wrong with a relationship when people have to check in with a friend before they do anything. If you have a friend that gets irritated if you go out with others and they're not invited, that's kind of an indication of an unhealthy dependency. Real friends give space and allow for growth in other areas. Real friends are not leeches, sapping your energy and limiting your relationships. Real friends are secure enough to allow a healthy independence, and you don't wear out your welcome. Another way to ruin a friendship is it's a lot more fun to talk about how we ruin friendships, isn't it? Another way is by being insensitive to changing moods and changing emotions. Proverbs 25:20 reads, like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. A good friend is sensitive to the other's mood. A good friend doesn't say, I'm happy today, so you have to be happy today. Or I'm sad today, so you have to be sad. He adjusts his emotions to the friend. In fact, Proverbs 27:14 reads, if a man loudly blesses his neighbor early in the morning, it will be taken as a curse. Now, you know what that's talking about, don't you? If you're married, you've likely experienced this in marriage. There are those who like to sing in the morning and those who hate those who like to sing in the morning. And the two often get married. So if you're one of those who love morning, you might want to be sensitive to those who do not. Some people wake up and they're happy. Good morning, Lord. It's great to be alive. It's wonderful. Other people wake up, it's morning. I just hate being alive. We need to be sensitive, actually, on both sides of that to the other. That's just one way you need to be sensitive to the moods of others. One other way you can abuse a friendship is by always demanding an apology and wearing your feelings on your sleeve. Look at Proverbs 17:9. He who covers an offense promotes love, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. Listen how the Living Bible paraphrases that. Love forgets mistakes. Nagging about them parts the best of friends. Some people don't ever cover over an offense. They get their feelings hurt easily, and they keep score. They nurse a grudge, and they'll remind you, you didn't call me when I was sick. You were 10 minutes late. You didn't apologize. You didn't stand up for me before my parents. My son won the contest, and you didn't say anything. I changed my hair. You didn't even notice. You walked right by me and didn't speak. Some people even get mad if you don't hit like on their post on Facebook. Isn't that petty? And if you want to ruin a friendship, you just keep track of past offenses. You keep score of everything and you demand an apology. You keep your feelings on your sleeve and people will avoid you like you have COVID-19. They'll draw away from you eventually because they don't want to walk on eggshells. They never feel comfortable around you because they know you're keeping score. Paul wrote this to the Corinthians about real love. Love is not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. That's what makes friendship. Well, thirdly, there's some positive traits that improve friendships listed in the book of Proverbs, and they make relationships stronger with the passing of time. So the first quality that improves friendships is loyalty in times of adversity. Proverbs 27:10 says, never abandon a friend, either yours or your father's. When disaster strikes, you won't have to ask your brother for assistance. It's better to go to a neighbor than to a brother who lives far away. If If you really love a person, you'll stand by them in times of adversity, in contrast with the people who desert the friend when difficulty comes. When we were coming back from one of our trips to Haiti, one of our team members got separated from us as we went through customs. We looked and looked, couldn't find him anywhere. We just couldn't see him anywhere around. And it was a long line, and we didn't really have much time before we had to catch our next flight. And so we went on into security, figuring that we'd see him there. Either he'd be ahead of us or behind us or something like that. And when we finally saw him, he was way back in the line from us. And to be honest, it looked certain that he would not get to the plane in time for our next flight. Well, one team member volunteered to wait, and the rest went on to the next flight. Now, when I told this in first service, I realized that made everybody else look selfish. It wasn't that way. I mean, there were only one person needed to stay, but one stayed. And because that's what friends do. That's what a friend does. They barely made the flight, but they made it. That's friendship. Loyalty in times of adversity. Anybody can be loyal, and this proverb says, never abandon a friend, neither yours nor your father's, and then you won't need to go to a distant relative for help in a time of need. Second, more difficult way to improve a friendship is by rejoicing in times of victory. Now, that sounds easy when you read it on the screen, rejoicing in times of victory. But that can be extremely tough to do for a lot of people. And in certain situations, that can be tough. Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A friend loves at all times. Not only does he stand by you in adversity, but there's an even more dramatic demonstration of love, and that is, can you celebrate the victory of somebody else? Romans 12 instructs, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Sometimes it's easier. I mean, come on now. Sometimes it's easier to weep with those who weep than it is to rejoice with those who rejoice. When we lived in Ohio, there was a set of twins in the church who were about our age. They were both married. They were involved in the church. One of them told us that when she was a senior in high school, she was homecoming queen, and her family didn't even acknowledge it, didn't even say anything happened because they were afraid of offending her twin. Now, both those girls are fantastic ladies. They still are. The one was just a little more shy, but I think she could have handled that. But that helped us because when we found out that we were having twins, we decided we would celebrate accomplishments no matter what. One of our twins won the math award in his graduating class for being a math student, and he was the salutatorian, and we celebrated that. Of course, the other one will tell you that he's the smarter one of the two if you ask him, so, you can make up your own minds there. But there are times when it's tough to celebrate with someone, to rejoice with those who rejoice. When your friend gets a promotion, can you rejoice with them even if you hadn't had a promotion in a long time? When your friend's child is the center of attention and yours isn't, can you rejoice? When somebody praises your friend, can you say, that's fantastic, and mean it? It's what I love about Jonathan in the Old Testament. Jonathan was King Saul's son. He was in line to inherit the throne, but God anointed David, and Jonathan wasn't jealous of David. Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. It appears they were best friends. He rejoiced with David in his promised promotion. His dad, Saul, definitely did not see it that same way. He didn't like that Jonathan was seeing it that way. But Jonathan legitimately rejoiced with David. Maybe that's why we name our sons Jonathan and not Saul. A friend loves at all times, and love never fails. The way through friendships is honesty in times of disobedience. Look at Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Judas kissed Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, but it wasn't the kiss of a friend. It was the kiss of betrayal. And there's some people who will flatter you and praise you to the highest because that's what you want to hear. Behind your back, they stab you in the back. And they're critical. Friendship. I love what's written in Proverbs 25:16 about flattery. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it, and you'll vomit. Flattery, too much flattery, will make you sick. A good friend doesn't just flatter you. He tells you the truth. If you do well, he compliments you. But if you're walking in disobedience, a good friend will tactfully tell you the truth, even if it hurts in that moment. If you have a friend who's dating someone who isn't good for them, or if you have a friend endangering his or her marriage, you're not a friend if you sit back and say nothing because you're afraid that what you're going to say will wound them. That's not a good friend. This passage says, better a wound from a friend than kisses from an enemy. Wounds from a friend are better than kisses from an enemy. By the way, if you have a friend who cares enough about you that they have the courage to confront you on some blind spot in your life, you're not very mature if you don't listen to them. You don't listen to what they have to say. They're not doing it just to hurt you. And even if they are wrong, their intent is good, so listen to them and be open-minded about whether they're right or wrong. Proverbs 28 says, in the end, people appreciate honest criticism far more than flattery. A good friend is honest in times of disobedience. The last characteristic that improves friendship is graciousness in times of stress. Now, I love those of you that take notes, and I'm sorry that we go right into the verse on every one of these. So I never want to offend you guys. So if you missed any of the fill in the blanks, see me later, and I'll give that to you. But Proverbs 22:11 says, he who loves a pure heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king for his friend. While a good friend is honest, he's also gracious in his speech. We call that tact, the ability to make the point without making an enemy. A preacher that I know said that his 14-year-old son went to work one Saturday for an elderly woman in their church who had a reputation for having kids work for her but not paying them very well. He worked for 6 hours. She paid him $10. That's been a while since that happened, but that's still pretty chintzy. So he came home a little disappointed. Well, about a week later, the same lady called and asked for his son again. And this, back in the days, when we used telephones, but his pastor listened carefully to the conversation to see if his son was willing to go back to work for her or to see if he'd squirm out of it. And he could tell that his son was trying to squirm out of it, and the lady must have sensed it too, because he could hear her say, was the pay last time not enough? The pastor wondered if his son was going to lie and say, oh no, it was plenty. That's not why I'm hesitant. Or he could have been brutally frank and said, was it not enough? You paid me just a little over $1 an hour. You're abusing kids is what you're doing. But he didn't say either of those things. Instead, he just said, would you like for me to tell you what I get paid when I work at other places? That's a tactful answer. We read that Jesus was full of grace and truth. That's a rare combination. A good friend is loyal in times of adversity, rejoices in times of victory, honest in times of disobedience, and gracious in times of stress. There's one final proverb about friendship that probably the most important, and it's found in Proverbs 18:24. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. No matter how many friends you have, no matter how many close or intimate friends you have, you will one day come to the end. You will one day stand at the cavern of death, standing face to face with the grave. And no matter how much your friends love you, they will not be able to help you at that moment. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother, and his name is Jesus. He's promised to never leave you or forsake you. He's loyal to the very end. He's the most incredible friend you can ever have. Our Heavenly Father, thank you for what we see about friendship, and Lord, help us to select the right friends, but also, really, even more importantly than that, help us to be the right friend. And Lord, for those here who haven't repaired the friendship with you, help them to take a step to do that today, and just to get a step or two closer today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.